At the end of a very long week, but very exciting week, of which I'll tell you about, I think it's time to do top 5. The first bit is to show off, if you let me show off, because it's been a fantastic week that I want to share with you. For those of you that are looking to hear about Barcelona or Real Madrid or Granada being top or what else am I talking about, a little bit of Odegaard again, about Pochettino even, that'll come later. But it was a week that started me traveling to Norway. I am doing some work for TV2 in Norway, and it was an opportunity to actually share time with those that are involved in the broadcasting of Spanish football in Norway. And the fascinating thing for me is that we did 2 seminars, they call it, basically just sat down around a table and, sat down around a space and just talk about Spanish football, about my experiences there, about what I think they should know or what they should look at. Ended up being generally about knowledge and trying to get to know something that's new to them, but they're so hungry for information. It was fantastic to the kind of questions we got. We spoke about everything, Odegaard, of course, and Solskjaer too, but mostly about what makes Spanish football special and what's interesting for them to know, relationships between media and clubs, etc. That was Oslo and Bergen. And then Wednesday, I made my way to Madrid because on Thursday, I had to present the Ambassadors Gala of La Liga, their big night, La Liga's big night, in which they present, it's an idea that they've created and everybody's copying now. You get all players or players that recently have retired and made them represent your league all over the world. So in that event, we had Mendieta, Luis Garcia, Robert Pires, Canute, Samuel Eto'o, Carles Puyol, César Sánchez, Fernando Hierro. So it was a fantastic evening of them sharing the experiences with us, and it was good as always. As much having them on the stage for an hour and a half or so, as talking to them after. A lot of little stories that came out from there. Especially, perhaps the one that impressed me the most was that Canute, he's so passionate about the academy that he's got in Mali and the work that he's doing in them. In fact, he's got players now in Europe that were kids with nothing, he describes it, that came to his academy, and now they are at RB Salzburg or Southampton or others. So I'm going to get him to talk to us in the BBC in the podcast there, or my own podcast soon. More on that later. I've already put the cover of that podcast. It's going to be the Pure Football podcast. More on that later. But anyway, great story. The problem was that the night before, in my flight from Amsterdam, so it was Bergen, Amsterdam, Madrid, they lost my suitcase. So I had 1 hour before shops closed, Corte Inglés to be precise. I had to go and get a new suit for the event. This was on Wednesday, of course, the flight, and when they lost my luggage. And then I had to get a new suit, and I had to get everything new to make sure that I was presentable the next day. The luggage appeared in the morning, but it was a bit of a tense moment. Anyway, that was great. And then the next day I had to get a very early flight to go to San Sebastián and share time with Martin Odegaard. You'll soon be able to watch the interview. It will go on TV2, and after that I'll put it on my YouTube channel and perhaps even transcribe it for a paper I work for. More on that later. But yeah, it was fantastic to share time with him and see his progression. We discussed even his tactically and technically how he works, his position on the pitch. We discussed that on the pitch itself, and it was fascinating viewing. So that was interesting because I was asking in English and he was answering in Norwegian, and I understood some of it. But I'll get that translated at some point for you to enjoy. And then Saturday I went to see the Madrid derby, and before Getafe Barcelona. And that's the 2 things that we're going to speak about next. Starting with the Madrid derby, it was disappointing. There's no denying. There was a lot of tension, and even in the lineup, tension, intensity. There was a lot of that, but there wasn't much football because I think both sides wanted not to lose from the lineup or from the way the coaches asked the players to behave. Two examples in the lineup: instead of James, which of course guarantees work, we've seen it in recent weeks as we analysed in Viva La Liga for La Liga TV. He actually does a lot of work without the ball. But Fede Valverde was preferred. Fede Valverde still hasn't released his tension, maybe, or confidence. You still got a player that doesn't do enough with the ball, and mostly it's about his position and making sure that he helps Casemiro, even though that's not really where he should be. He should be playing further up the field, and in there have a bigger impact. But by having Fede Valverde with defensive obligations and not James, was a message from Zidane, of course. And Atletico Madrid, I saw Simeone telling Trippier twice not to go forward. Interestingly enough, as the game progressed, that changed because Trippier felt that, and Simeone, that Hazard wasn't tracking back, that physically he's not at his best. So eventually, Trippier became, in the last half an hour, 40 minutes even, of the game, one of the most important attacking forces going forward. So, but at first he was told him off for going forward twice in the first 10 minutes. So the message was, guys, this is one not to lose. From the game, one player was ahead of everybody else, and that was Thomas. Thomas had a clear message of dominating the midfield, of being there and stepping up for pressure when they didn't have the ball, but when they had the ball, to be very incisive. And he put a lot of balls into in front of him, direct vertical balls. Not long balls, but balls that beat defensive lines with pace, with accuracy, and the likes of Saul and Koke, even Joao Felix, were ready to receive them. This was obviously something prepared by Simeone, who must have thought that was one of the weaknesses of Real Madrid, or something that where you could attack them when you can put a ball that leaves the pressure of the forwards of Real Madrid and also the midfielders, leaves them behind. That worked very well. It's just that Real Madrid kept the lines very close together, so there wasn't much space for the likes of Joao Felix or Costa or Koke or Saul to impress. And also another thing that Thomas did, 11 times he passed the ball to Trippier in wide positions, put the ball in front of him, and some crosses were converted on the back of that. But the most danger came from Real Madrid. It was one that they didn't want to lose. The forwards, they didn't impress, and we're going to have to, I thought we have to wait for another game to actually convince neutrals that this is a league worthwhile watching. And then, of course, it was Sevilla, Real Sociedad, which was fantastic. And we'll talk about that later. First, we'll deal with Barcelona and the victory at Getafe. Surprisingly enough, Dembélé was out of the squad. And Valverde says that he felt a little bit of a pain, a niggling pain. So they thought, no, let's rest him. It had happened on the training session the day before, but still he travelled to Madrid. And Dembélé, with so many injuries, at a time where he needs the time to play, because Carlos Perez is doing well, but of course if Dembélé was ready, he will be one of the three, now that Messi is not playing, alongside Luis Suarez and Griezmann. But no Dembélé. Carlos Perez did well, very well. He keeps reminding me of Pedro, how he's on the right-hand side, but comes inside, shoots from outside, puts crosses in, adds intensity, and he's the only one that runs in behind. Others don't do it because Griezmann tends to come inside and link up, or that's what he did in this game anyway, link up with the midfield. A midfield that, by the way, is becoming the more regular one, because they're the ones who can keep possession in small, tight spaces. Getafe were always going to put a lot of pressure high actually, and they needed Busquets and Arthur and De Jong to beat that pressure. They did that very well in the second half. But I was saying, Griezmann comes in, Luis Suarez doesn't have the pace to run in behind either, even though he did it very cleverly for the goal, and the first goal with the assist of Ter Stegen. There was some assist. Have you seen it? Have you watched it? He actually hits it with his left foot. He comes out to defend the ball out of the box, cushions it with his chest, and then uses his left foot to put a fantastic assist for Luis Suarez, who is very clever and loves the ball to the goalkeeper. David Soria, who didn't have a good game, because in the second goal he doesn't block the ball, and Junior arrived there to score the second goal, the second Barcelona goal. So in the first one, it was all about counter-attacking from Barcelona with Getafe that had come out really, really well. But in the second half, Barcelona controlled the game and they just were superior to Getafe. Piqué spoke in the press conference afterwards and said that on the back of an article that I think I mentioned last week, where a very well-known journalist, Xavier Bosch, decided to put together a lot of frustrations that the press has had with the players, but also accusations that come directly from the board about the influence of the players in the changing room. All that was put together, a mishmash that perhaps needed a little bit more detail. There was a lot of accusations out there of the influence of players for the signing of other players, for the signing of coaches, for the getting rid of coaches. It was all put in rushedly, I felt, as that word I've just made up. But in any case, Piqué was reacting to that, and he was basically saying, I know where it comes from. I know who is putting this out there. I know the director is putting it out there, top director. And better not go that way, because otherwise we're going to hurt each other. So a little bit of, it happens when there is bad results. This kind of thing, creates tension at a club where there's a lot of messages being put out there behind the scenes. And I think we all know where they all come from. Anyway, it was a sour note, if you like, on a game that showed that Barcelona are actually in a better state that they played better than they had done recently. And of course, they've got a big game in midweek against Inter. And then, if I'm not mistaken, it's Sevilla next. Is it Sevilla? I think so. So, important week for Barcelona. Sevilla, wow, amazing. It was a brilliant, very, very good game by Sevilla against a Real Sociedad that we were all praising, deservedly so as well, because of the football, with and without the ball. But Sevilla were superior, were more intense, the high tempo that they applied, the solutions to every attack. They created lots of chances, should have won for much more than 3-2 eventually. They were really, really fantastic team. Ocampos on the right-hand side looks a winger or an offensive player who scored a fantastic goal as well, who's going to grow. Nolito on the left-hand side did a lot of damage. De Jong seems a little bit the tone-deaf note in this team, but works hard without the ball. And in the midfield, Fernando and Banega did a lesson on both the creating and the destroying, if you like. Diego Campos at the back, centre back, is looking fantastic. Navas on the right, attacking as well. They just didn't. And Reguilón, it was like he kept going and going and going and stretching the defence of Real Sociedad. They didn't deal with it. Started well, scored the first goal, but couldn't deal with the Sevilla. They were brilliant, and they just need to make sure that they don't disconnect as they did against Eibar when they went 2-0 up away, ended up losing 3-2. It did not represent what Sevilla has been doing this season. Odegaard, who I went to see on Friday, as I said, who was the best of Real Sociedad and gave an assist for the second goal, but he cannot do everything together. He needs everybody else, especially the defence, to actually not to concede so many chances, and a midfield that was quite porous on this occasion. Finally, just to say, there's been rumours this weekend about Spurs already choosing who's going to be next if Pochettino leaves in the summer. Now, it's September. It's 3 months after they played the Champions League final. We all know the problems and the limitations of this Spurs. It's a business model that works for paying a stadium and for challenging for the top four, but it cannot do anymore, and nobody will be able to do anymore. As we know, Pochettino has maximized the potential of this side, and a lot of people are saying, but it looks like he's had enough. It looks like the players don't want any more. And they forget that September, October tends to be a difficult period for Spurs, has been in the last 2 or 3 years, I think, if my memory serves me well. And then eventually they just get where they belong. In fact, they are where they belong, which is top 4, top 5, arguing with the likes of Leicester for a top 4 position. West Ham, surprisingly, being there. But, that there are enough evidence in there that the team can compete for top 4, which really is the target. I think Spurs should be realistic, and the fans too as well. Top 4 is the target, and they basically around there. So where all this talk about what's going to happen next already coming from? And I don't know. I know where the story originally was published. As I said on Twitter, I know a lot of stuff gets published that's rubbish, but I was surprised that it was picked by many others and discussed as if it was genuine or interesting or reflected really what's happening, or it's a good analysis of the situation. It's just surprised me that it caught so many people's imaginations, this kind of a story. And I think it's because without too much knowledge or without too much information, you pick something like that, and it's a good discussion point. But it seems to me that a lot of the debate should be created by good brains who work really hard to put ideas together based on information and conversations, not picking on something that's put out there for the entertaining of the social media world or the social, the internet world. What I mean is, if a story like this based in nothing gets discussed in the bigger media outlets, we're losing a battle. I think we should actually keep analyzing things with depth when we are doing it for some of the big outlets out there. And of course, there is a space for the other stuff, for the rubbish stuff, if you like, or for the discussions that come from passion and the kind of discussions you have in a bar. There's space for that. But when, instead of from big media outlets, and I'm talking about internet outlets as well, the big names, the one that you have to respect, a new one that's come into the scene, the Athletic, for instance, those kind of people are the ones that, in my eyes, should drive the agenda. When it's the other way around, when the internet produces debates that get into the big outlets, I think that's disappointing, because a lot of things that happen on the internet, as I said, not everything, but a lot of the things, this kind of thing that, who's going to be the new replacement for Pochettino next season when we are in September, if we actually give it too much importance, it's becoming a little bit lazy. Okay, I'll leave it at that, and there'll be more next week. And as I said, there will be a podcast soon, Pure Football Podcast, with names the big names in football, and discussions that are not the usual discussions. But if you know me, you know that I tend not to do the usual. So goodbye for now.